This is what leads this hour. Finance Minister Mboweni has called on the public to comment on his economic strategy blueprint for South Africa. The minister released his 77-page plan to boost growth and create jobs on National Treasury's website yesterday. Now, the plan contains proposals aimed at getting Eskom back on track. These include selling off some of Eskom's coal-fired power stations and allowing households to sell electricity back to the grid. Other bold proposals include plans to make petrol cheaper, and the blueprint does envisage raising GDP growth by at least 3 percentage points over 10 years and creating more than 1 million jobs. Well, the Statistician General has called the plan just not cutting it. Perhaps this is a way for us to unpack it a little bit more. And these are the graphs that perhaps set the idea in motion. We've had 8 plans in the last 25 years alone, starting, of course, with the RDP, the Reconstruction and Development Program back in 1995. Of course, a lot of people will remember that for the housing that it brought together. Then coming in 96, the year after that, was a program called GEAR, which is famously known for having not succeeded in the way that government would have preferred. The Growth, Employment and Redistribution Plan not going according to course. The Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative for South Africa, that's ASGISA as well, back in 2005, then replaced GEAR in an attempt to boost growth in South Africa, focusing primarily on sort of 5 key areas and in trying to enhance growth in South Africa and ensure that what was lost before democracy, and that is during apartheid, of course, was perhaps given back to all those that had lost it back then. The new growth path then set motion back in 2010, of course, and at that point we sort of hoped that things would indeed turn around following the financial crisis of 2008-2009. In 2012, we saw the National Development Plan then come to fruition. Of course, then we saw Trevor Manuel being part of the National Planning Commission, bringing that to the fore. It was aimed at getting unemployment at 14% in 2020 and at 6% in 2030. We are certainly very, very far from that. Then we got the 14 confidence-boosting measures in 2018. That was by then Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba, who had hoped that these sentiments would bring some restitution, some hope to the state of local economics and confidence from around the world. That didn't work, and President Ramaphosa then tried to introduce the 400 billion rand infrastructure fund. That has not necessarily kicked off in a way that we'd like, with infrastructure in South Africa continuing to struggle. In 2019, we've now just seen the economic transformation, inclusive growth and competitiveness paper, which perhaps is not necessarily a plan as yet, because the finance minister does say that he would like to get some comment then from South Africans. You certainly can do so. The details of that plan are on National Treasury's website. Very quickly, this is what is in that plan. As I mentioned, that is what is in perhaps the sentiment around the minister. He would like to modernize network industries in order to promote competitiveness. This means upgrading a whole lot of the technology that is used around government departments and just what it is that actually happens and how those processes are perhaps moved a whole lot more forward. Number 2 is lowering barriers to entry, and this has been a concern for many a time. Of course, just the question around how exactly do small and medium enterprises get involved in trying to be part of this economy if we're alleviating and pushing them out. Number 3, prioritizing labor-intensive growth. Now, the question around this, however, is that with sectors like agriculture, like services, like mining, indeed forming a part of this, then things like construction and infrastructure, which of course are necessarily part of the first one, should indeed be a key element and key part of this, and that is certainly within the plan. In the next part of the plan as well, focusing on the key 6 areas, then you'll take a look at the next graph, and that will clearly send out that sentiment as well as to what exactly is next, what follows through after we've gotten to this, and it's the implementing of focused and flexible industrial and trade policies. The worry one certainly must have at this point is just about how. We don't necessarily have all the details. The 77-page document does speak around just what needs to be done, but it doesn't say how it is going to be done. It does speak about making sure that things like electricity are focused on, and we'll unpack that in just a bit, but it talks about promoting export competitiveness and it unpacks it in quite a lengthy process. But what exactly does that mean? What exactly needs to be implemented? These are all notions that still stick within the NDP prescribed format back in 2012. So have we rehashed a document here 7 years later, quantifying the impact of proposed growth reform? So that means that we sit with a reform, that we're trying to change things and be able to quantify it so that we're able to measure it in the end and get a clearer picture. Now, one of the important parts of this plan is that it does significantly look at Eskom and how exactly to drive where Eskom goes from here. And this is Eskom's path to the light, according to the plan. It says that to ensure Eskom's sustainability going forward, electricity tariffs will need to continue to increase. That is the stark reality, South Africa. No matter what happens from here on, unfortunately, it means that electricity prices are going to continue to increase. That's according to the Finance Minister and National Treasury then. Eskom's current business model is unsustainable. That is an obvious sentiment that has been shared multiple times before, and its contingent liabilities, that's all its debt, pose a significant burden on the fiscus, something we've continued to speak about. More than 400 billion owed by Eskom to its debtors. Government could take a decision that Eskom should sell coal-fired power stations, possibly through a series of auctions. Now, this one is certainly going to be the difficult one, because unions will not like the selling off of coal-fired power stations, because that perhaps changes employment contracts. It changes who and how people work there, and that also leads to privatization. But what we noted, however, is that the sale of these assets could give us 450 billion rand. That's according to an independent study that is alluded to in this document. 450 billion rand is almost exactly how much Eskom owes in debt. So that tells you a clear picture of exactly where we are as well. And the restructuring of the electricity sector will then limit the fiscal and economic risk that Eskom poses and support economic transformation through more entrance into the electricity space. These are all the significant enough factors. Of course, there's a whole lot more. That is just the tip of the iceberg. We'll continue to try and unpack it for you. But that certainly is one of the big and cruxes of that document. Just how significant is it? Just how can we get that done? Can we implement it sufficiently is perhaps the one element that we will all be looking at. We've asked for it countless times. The word Eskom appears in the document 28 times, but the word broadband appears 33 times. That is a massive, massive difference. The former Statistician General isn't happy with the Finance Minister's plan to create jobs, saying that it just doesn't cut it. Mboweni's plan is to create, as we said, at least 1 million jobs in 10 years. But the plan released yesterday afternoon is actually silent on things like poverty and even on inequality. And as such, it is hopeless when it comes to job creation. Now, that's according to Dr. Pali Lehohla, who now joins us on the line. Dr. Pali, thank you so much for the time. I know you're still on the way to the airport right now, but very quickly, let's just unpack exactly your unhappiness and unease with this plan. Does it offer the planning you've spoken about prior?
I thought that the plan would have clear objectives around the three challenges of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And unfortunately, it's very skimpy on details on that. In fact, it doesn't mention poverty and inequality. And so when we have achieved all that, where we will be in terms of poverty and inequality, as far as jobs are concerned, it's only 1 million jobs after 10 years. That's not a plan for what South Africa faces at the moment.
Yeah.
So one would like to see it driven by those objective realities that South Africa has and resolving those. Short of that, certainly it doesn't suggest that solving or addressing South Africa's main blighting problems. That's my concern. The second concern is
We do seem to be struggling with that line, Dr. Lehohla. We'll try to come back to you a little bit later because you do have some salient points that we're hoping to get to mention then indeed. So that is the state for now, however, when it comes to that economic plan, that economic transformation plan that has been set forth then by the finance minister, who has said, however, that he will not engage on the matter. Himself, the DDG, the deputy minister are not engaging on the matter, and will hopefully at 1 o'clock get to speak to the man who has been helpful in trying to put together this document. That's Duncan Pieterse, who is then a National Treasury economist, who has been able to put this element together. So we'll get to discuss it a whole lot further, and we'll hopefully get to chat to Mr. Pali Lehohla. We actually do have him back on the line. Mr. Lehohla, we're still just talking about your second salient point there before we got cut off. Apologies.
I doubt whether it has consulted people in manufacturing, in agriculture, and in mining. If you look at mining, of course, it makes the assumption that it is a sunset sector. I do not know, but it might well be it is a sunset sector. But I think it hasn't consulted agriculture, manufacturing, and all those real sector areas. Obviously, for it to raise debates, I think it's an important thing for a plan like this one or a document like this one to open the space around how we grow the economy. But as I said, the key outcomes of unemployment, poverty, and
yeah. Mr. Lehohla, we keep getting cut off on the line, but I'm just going to ask another question. Hopefully, if you'll let me then as well. We plan to add 1 million jobs over 10 years. Surely the scenario in South Africa is a whole lot worse than that.
Well, I mean, we have 10 million people unemployed currently, and adding 100,000 every year or 500,000 every year. 1 million jobs in 5 years, in 10 years, not even in 5 years, will crack what South Africa's employment. So a plan that doesn't address that critically and say, well, you need 1 million jobs a year. Whether that is achievable or not is another matter, but certainly for us to say we are putting something bold on the table, it must start with jobs. And how many jobs, how we need to reduce unemployment, and how will we reach 14% unemployment rate and 6% unemployment rate in the future. Those are the key things. On education, yes, it talks about skills, but I'm not very sure how it addresses that particular area of skills as well, because we have a serious deficit. And under the circumstances, I don't see with the fees must fall and we have apportioned money for education, how that will actually solve the key problems that we have. So one would like to see a very integrated document because it's modeled and what that model says to us. But if it says 1 million jobs in 10 years, I'm afraid it doesn't cut it.
That certainly is the sentiment there. Dr. Lehohla, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on Point. Certainly unpack the matter a whole lot more. Of course, we continue to have guests up until 3 p.m. just to unpack that economic transformation paper there released by the finance minister. That was Dr. Pali Lehohla, the former Statistician General.